A very good evening to you and happy new month of October. I am Undiro Ganga, ready to bring you up to speed with all the top stories making headlines across the globe. And as you know, we're all about business. Here's a glance of those stories making headlines in the business world.
So your presence here demonstrates how
Kenya-South Africa tourism ties coming together for greater economic benefits.
Yesterday,
Africa Hotel Investment Forum, localize, localize, localize. Main message at conference. African Union Ministers of Tourism Conference 2018. Time to act. Tough talking Balala wants. Thank you for staying with us. Now on to our top story. The Kenya Association of Travel Agents, Qatar, has today joined hands with South African product owners to create a relationship that will open up Kenyans to the tremendous potential that South Africa presents. The partnership will enable Qatar to present fantastic opportunities for Kenyans in particular and East Africans in general, be it business or pleasure. Our reporter Daisy Wamboa attended the ceremony and brings us the following report.
Welcome to South Africa, your own personal.
The Kenya Association of Travel Agents, that is mandated to represent members in the local and international spaces, has today partnered with the South African product owners in a trade workshop with the theme Heritage, Hospitality and Sustainable Tourism Development. While addressing the media, Bonte Madiba, the South Africa product owners Regional Trade and Relations Manager Africa, stated that the trade workshop created a platform for a number of Kenyan and South African travel exhibitors.
South African tourism is determined in its desire to drive in continental collaboration in a bid to grow Africa's tourism sector. This is evident today as we hold a trade workshop with Kenyan travel trade bodies such as Kenya Association of Travel Agents. This workshop is aimed at showing the best South African tourism products to Kenyan tourism trade companies.
She went on to add that the partnership will also enable Qatar to negotiate affordable rates for Kenyans, which will enable them explore South Africa, whether for business or leisure.
As South African tourism, we are passionate and enthusiastic about the East African market, especially Kenya. We understand the lucrative potential that the market has to offer, and we are very excited for Kenyans to explore the great opportunities that South Africa has.
She continued to commend the Kenyan government and the Kenya Association of Travel Agents for working together in order to achieve one common goal with the same outcomes in mind.
We commend Kenya, the Kenyan government and the Kenya Association of Travel Agents for working together in order to achieve one goal with similar outcomes for all.
Speaking during the press conference, the Qatar CEO Nikanor Sabula expressed his confidence in the partnership as it will provide fantastic opportunities for Kenyans.
we are happy to see Kenya and South Africa joining up together, and this partnership will enable Qatar to provide great opportunities for Kenyans wishing to travel to South Africa, be it for business or pleasure purposes. We have been promoting destinations such as Dubai and Turkey to our citizens, and it's now time we sell our neighbor South Africa in order to create new and exciting opportunities for the Kenyans and the East Africa region as a whole.
He further reiterated the importance of having the South African delegation in the country as they negotiate and deliberate on the exciting, valuable and affordable opportunities that are available to the Kenyan citizens.
We are proud to have the South African delegation here in our city as we negotiate and deliberate on the exciting opportunities that await us.
The various delegates from South Africa were pleased to be in the country to cement the partnership and spoke on the expected benefits.
Well, the benefits that we're hoping for is to see increased visitor numbers from Kenya into Cape Town. And I think with the introduction of the direct flights into the city is one positive way that we see and can expect these numbers to go up.
Mostly, the most important one is open the dialogue in terms of conversations between the two countries and the tourism products. As it is already, we have South Africans very much interested in coming into Kenya. It becomes easier in terms of doing business between the two countries now, because you are no longer going to search on the internet to say, who can assist me if I need to package Kenya. Now you have met, Qatar agents, and they've been accredited and they're vetted, so you know that you are dealing with someone who will not let you down.
The exhibitors did not shy away from noting further efforts that need to be put in place to strengthen the relationship even more.
What can be done more is perhaps now is the time for Africa to have an inclusive and a rotating tourism event where each and every country can participate equally and share what their challenges are, share what their successes are, and share what the different products that Africa has to offer. And let it be a platform where we can show off to the world and say, visit Africa, and we can plan your whole itinerary around Africa.
This trade workshop comes at a time that the South African tourism is determined in its desire to drive continental collaboration in a bid to grow Africa's tourism sector. With the immense potential the sector has, it goes without saying that Kenyans should position themselves to reap the benefits that the partnership promises. For BrandPlus TV Business News, I am Daisy Wambua.
When the biggest event in the world was happening.
The Africa Hotel Investment Forum marked day one of the event at the Radisson Blu Hotel in Nairobi Upper Hill area. The forum seeks to bring together stakeholders in the hospitality industry to deliberate on new ways of creatively investing in the African market. Take a look at that report.
It's an absolute pleasure to be back here in Kenya.
The conference brings together different nationalities, with Africans topping the charts with a massive over 60% attendance. It is for this reason that the local brands were at the center of the day's deliberations, with the key question being, how do you grow a strong local brand?
Brands are very, very important to Africa. A lot of Africans understand brands. They've seen Coca-Cola, they've seen Hilton, they've seen all these brands, and they aspire to these sort of brands and the benefits that they bring. What we've seen recently over the last few years is African brands are taking over, and they're starting to really come in. What it means is it's the same things that you need for all brands. So you need integrity, you need a story that it sells. So when you walk into a Latitude hotel, you know what you're going to find. It's going to be a unique hotel, it's going to be really well run, you're going to be spoiled. If you run into a Hilton, you know exactly what you're going to get. It's exactly the same for an African brand. You've got to give that consistency, even if it's not a consistency of product, it's got to be a consistency of service.
The current managing director.
While many businesses fail to recognize the economic value that a local aspect adds to a business, Paul Mack, Director Latitude Hotels, says for any business to thrive in Africa, it is to be built on the foundation of Africa and Africans.
If you want to build a local brand, it has to be locally owned and locally operated, and you need to make sure that that is driven from the ground up. So all your employees need to understand what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go with the business.
Welcome to Kenya.
With international brands setting base on the African continent and local brands having limited financial muscle to flex against their international competitors, David Harper, Director Leisure Property Services Limited, says local brands must devise their own unique value propositions.
The key issue that we have in Africa is an awful lot of the times that most of the hotels that are built are business hotels. And a business hotel, my secretary might book it for me, and she might see the Marriott name, think that's safer than Serena. Hopefully that will change, and it comes with time, it comes with marketing, and it comes with the flags. However many hotels you've got around the continent, people know you better. So it's a time thing, but it's also a quality thing. As long as you keep providing the service that you've promised, the brand will grow and people will recognise it. And soon we've got Serenas all over the world. Well, not all over the world, but they're not just in Africa. Started as an African brand, it's now a pan-continental brand.
A couple of things are quite important.
The future prospects of the African hospitality space are promising. According to Thomas Emmanuel, Director Business Development STR, all indicators are pointing towards the right direction, which translates to growth for the sector.
If you look around this conference, the African Hotel Investment Forum, all of the major global operators are here. There are Many announcements from the likes of Accor, Marriott, Hyatt, Intercontinental Hotels Group, Radisson, all expressing their interest to really increase their pipeline across Africa. And we're seeing that with the increase in flight connectivity, the rise of the African airline brands, the rise of the African middle class as well. It really is a continent, I think, with plenty of potential for the future. And with these big hotel brands really putting a lot of focus on the continent, I think it really does underline investment sentiment being strong across Africa.
They're such a special part.
As curtains are drawn on day one of the Africa Hotels Investment Forum, it is paramount for the stakeholders to reevaluate their strategies in order to build formidable African brands that resonate with Africans and with them reap huge economic benefits. Cabinet Secretary Tourism Honorable Najib Balala today attended the official opening of the African Union Ministers of Tourism Conference at the Movenpick Hotel, Nairobi. The conference has seen the ministers form the Africa Tourism Organization, a body that is going to be the entity of changing the narrative of the African tourism sector. Karari John with the details.
The conference brought together different tourism ministers from the continent to discuss the state of tourism in the continent and how to grow this sector. CS Najib Balala, the chairman of the union, during his address stated that as much as tourism is important to the continent, Africa is not yet making use of the economic opportunities the sector presents.
What we get in Africa is only 68 million. In 2030, the estimation by UNWTO is 134 million. Currently, people employed in tourism is 21 million in Africa. Our target is to achieve by 2030, we have 100 million people employed in the continent of Africa.
The CS, however, attributed this to the negative publicity that the continent has been receiving from the Western media. This is, in the long run, has costed the continent a fortune as tourists opt to go elsewhere.
The problem we have is that the continent of Africa has been branded and tagged to be a continent that is the image of Ebola, the image of chaos, the image of diseases, and the image which we don't deserve, all negative images. What are we doing ourselves as nations of Africa to change that image to a better image? I believe the continent of Africa is where the future is. The continent of Africa has a diverse product that we are proud of, from beaches to mountains to deserts to culture, to safaris, to wildlife. Everything you can count in the world is available in Africa. In fact, much better preserved than any continent in the universe. But why is the branding and the image of the continent is negative? What can we do to make it positive? It's unfair when an incident, a small incident happens, blown out of proportion, and then brand the whole continent to be the image of that incident. And we have seen the Ebola disease. All of us in Africa suffered because we were branded as one country, while we are 54 countries in the continent of Africa.
To counter these challenges, CS Balala stated that there are myriad of things that need to be improved on the continent, key among them being security.
Number one is security. And that security, I can assure you, it is more perceived to be bad security than real in Africa. Because if it was bad security, we would not have existed as the people in the continent of Africa. That's why security is important. Our government are investing heavily, and I can assure you that Africa is safer than most of other places in the world.
He further noted that as much as the continent has a wide variety of products to offer in the tourism sector, the continent is yet to master the art of properly packaging its product to compete competitively in the global markets.
Number two is the product. I believe we have better products in the continent of Africa, from the beaches of Gambia, from the delta of Okavango in Botswana, from the pyramids of Egypt, from the beautiful city of Marrakesh in Morocco, from the safaris of Masai Mara and the migration of the wildebeest, from the Great Lakes of Uganda and the gorillas in Zimbabwe, in Rwanda. All that, the Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, all that we have in the continent of Africa. But we have not packaged it well, and it has not been appreciated well.
While Africa solely depends on foreign continents as the majority of tourists, the CES insisted that it's time that Africa capitalizes on domestic tourism by increasing accessibility and affordability of traveling across the continent.
Come to the continent of Africa, but also intra-Africa travel is crucial. We cannot continue making it very expensive to travel among neighbors, to be more expensive than to travel overseas to other continents. That's an agenda we need to take it seriously, because without accessibility, without affordability to travel, we will not increase the numbers that we are targeting today.
With the Africa Tourism Organization now formed, it is the hope of relevant stakeholders that the growth curve of the sector will have a positive trajectory and in the future become one of the biggest source of revenue for respective African governments. Reporting for BrandPlus TV, I am Karari John Wambugu.
Still on Matters Africa Hotel Investment Forum, the continent for the last decade has been doing well on the economic front, with investments totaling to billions of dollars streaming into the continent and double-digit GDP growth, as with the case of Ethiopia. However, that is just a drop in the ocean in comparison to what Africa can truly achieve economically if it strategically positions itself in the market. I had a sit down with Daniel Silk, Director Political Futures Consultancy, to have an in-depth conversation on social, economic and political drivers influencing sub-Saharan Africa economic growth. Take a look. Now, Africa is termed to be the next frontier in the global market. The potential that Africa as a continent bears cannot be sidelined or downplayed. However, there are pertinent issues that are stopping Africa from leveraging its full potential and translating that into economic benefit. That's why I'm joined by Daniel Silk, who happens to be a director at Political Futures Consultancy, to have a discussion around social, political and economic issues that act as a stumbling block towards the growth and development of Africa. Thank you very much, Daniel, for joining us. Just as we start this interview and set base for it, I would like us to talk about a general overview of the social, economic and political state of the African continent and how it plays into the greater picture of economic development.
One is the positive side, which is there are more international travelers, more global travelers, and notwithstanding many of the geopolitical challenges that occur globally, notwithstanding issues relating to protectionism, to China-US trade wars, to Brexit, the travel industry itself, the travel and leisure industry and the business travel industry remains on solid ground. So that's positive. But the other side of the equation clearly is that these big global geopolitical risks do impact economies everywhere. They impact and will impact the developed world's economies over the course of the next year or two. They will impact China going forward as well, as Chinese growth is likely to slow moderately in the course of the next year or so. And we are seeing indications already in terms of Chinese manufacturing, the Purchasing Managers Index in China off the boil, so to speak. And we will see that and have seen that affect the emerging markets and also frontier markets like ours here on the African continent as well. However, I think these are relatively short-term duration events, and I think notwithstanding many of these big global threats, we continue to see very good growth coming out of many parts of the African continent. And indeed, I think with a global slowdown that may well occur over the next 12 to 18 months or so, investors may well see returns on investment here on the African continent in particular as being more favorable to them as the Western markets slow moderately. And I think we could return to even greater interest, as it happens, in the developing markets. It may be a very good time for many Western or developed businesses to come into Africa right now to position themselves for what will be a changing environment in the next year or so.
Now, it's interesting you're talking about economic slowdown in other parts of the world. However, Africa has been on this journey of economic recovery, and it's estimated that in 2019, when the global growth will be 2.9%, Africa will be at 4.2%. Now, this means good things for the African continent, and I would like us to talk about what this kind of growth rate means for the continent.
Look, I've always been optimistic about Africa, but I've always been realistic in terms of assessing where downturns will occur. And despite the fact that we will see above average global growth over the course of the next year for the African continent as a whole, we've seen how growth doesn't occur all the time. We've seen how that 2015-2016 period saw a decline in growth. It occurred here in Kenya as a result of political concerns. It occurred in the big markets of Nigeria and Angola as a result of declining commodity prices that are now back on track. It occurred in South Africa because of a generally weak economy, and it's still weak in South Africa. So growth rates don't just keep on going up. There are specific blips on the chart. But I do think that there is an important element of recovery. There's a higher degree of political stability in a number of jurisdictions. Certainly here in Kenya, we've seen a rapprochement between the two competing political forces, which is positive for confidence, and it brings investment in, and you've seen it directly in terms of the hotel and leisure industry. And you've seen it in terms of airlines and airline traffic as well arriving in Nairobi with increases coming through. So, I mean, there's a positive. In terms of Ethiopia, political change in Ethiopia in terms of a new president certainly looks as though it's going to open up that economy. I mean, there's important changes taking place there. There was a centrally planned economy where government controlled most of the critical state-owned enterprises. They look as though many of them are going to be part privatized, or there will certainly be a sell-off of some of these assets, which should unlock substantial value and also build confidence in the Ethiopian market. The same could be said for Angola. Historically a Marxist government in Angola, not known for its love of private enterprise, yet we are seeing important changes in that market, along with better oil prices coming through that could lift Angola once again. So again, political change and the climate that's being created, very important for many of these markets going forward, and again, it will be reflected in the amount of hotel developments, and already you are seeing it mirrored in a sense when you look at the pipeline of hotel developments coming forward. It will start to increase in these markets that have been a little subdued, even Nigeria. Once they get over their election next year, which always creates a degree of uncertainty, I think Nigeria hopefully will again start to resume a better GDP path and will look at growth rates in excess of 2.5–3%. And Nigeria desperately needs that with her very, very fast expanding population.
Now, Africa is growing not just in terms of the economy, but also in terms of population. It is estimated that by the year 2050, 37% of the global births will be in Africa. Now, numbers can translate into different things. It can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. And I would like us to talk about what it will mean to have over 1 billion people and a high rate of urbanization in the continent in the year 2050.
Well, there are two ways of looking at it. You can look at the glass half full, which suggests here is a continent brimming with young people able to do work, generally speaking, very well educated, certainly by comparison to their parents or grandparents. I mean, the literacy rates in Africa have soared in the course of the last 20–30 years. The workers of the world will be here. But of course, the glass half empty scenario suggests that where you have such rapidly expanding populations, unless you create fairly decent jobs for a very large proportion of people, you will sow the seeds of social instability if that does not occur. We all in the industry of talking heads and academics and analysts speak about this demographic dividend for Africa, the point at which Africans are no longer dependent and we can effectively feed ourselves. This demographic dividend on Africa will occur in the 2050-2060 period, but it is predicated upon good growth and job creation. And ultimately, that's going to be the real defining factor. A big population without jobs ultimately is a danger. A big population with jobs is going to spur on this level of economic growth and this general enthusiasm for the African growth narrative that we see at the moment. So the pressure is on governments. The pressure is on good governance, the creation of transparent institutions, the same issues we've been talking about, which will improve competitiveness and ease of doing business across the continent. The pressure is on to really get that right over the course of the next 10 years. And I might add, the pressure is on the burgeoning urban infrastructure across many African countries to really get that right as well. Urban infrastructure will either aid all of this or will be an impediment to growth going forward. And I just think that physical environment in African cities is going to play a big role, and those cities that can harness the fourth industrial revolution, new modes of transport, those cities that can get that right are going to be the winners, and their populations will be the winners as well.
Such numbers create a market. However, Africa is not known for trading with itself. We've seen that being done in Europe, over 74% of trade, in Asia slightly over 50%. But in Africa it stands at a dismal 16%. Why is it important to have InterTrade in the continent for us to realize economic development?
Yeah, I think all of us have been talking about this for a long time, and we've all well understood that we've got to bring it home. That's all there is to it. But bringing it home is easier said than done. The first step clearly is the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which will improve the logistical and tariff barriers that have existed between our various countries. And that, I think, sets the scene for an enabling environment. So the regulatory and the physical nature of cross-border transactions is beginning to be tackled. So I'll give it a tick, and I think there's progress there. The other key factor is that we as Africans need well to understand what each of our strengths are and how do we play to those strengths in terms of what we are good at manufacturing. What services can we export? There's always a simple equation in my mind. We need to make stuff that people need, that people want. And we have to understand who makes it at the best quality and at the best price as well. And I think that study probably still has to be undertaken across Africa to see where we can complement each other in terms of goods that are tradable goods across the borders. I think we are well on the way to the enabling environment, but the practical nature of this is going to be more of a medium-term issue to go forward. Yes, I think the interesting, there's a side issue to this. In a world that's becoming more protectionist and is moving away from big free trade areas, we on this continent are moving towards an association, we're actually bucking the international trend. And good for us in a sense, because ultimately we need to help each other. The rest of the world are becoming more protectionist. They're looking after themselves. The Make America Great Again idea is looking after oneself. Well, Brexit and issues in Europe, populism in Europe as well, creating barriers between many parts of the European continent potentially and Africa and other emerging market countries, depending on how the political pendulum swings in Europe. So time for us to really react on that, and time for us to make our economies a lot more open and porous to one another, but equally so, the conditions for doing business have to be outstanding. We have to get rid of the usual issues, infrastructure constraints. We need to prioritize that. Electricity across the African continent, which still affects nearly 500 million Africans who don't have access to proper electricity every single day. That's not good enough. We need to work on that particular issue. Again, transparent institutions really need to perform above patronage and corruption networks. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think the imperatives are there to get it done, and this needs to be done to react to some of those negative global tendencies that we've spoken about.
There are several several industries that have been doing really well in the continent, and hospitality is one of those industries. Now, I would like us to talk about the rate of tourist arrival in the country, the hotel pipeline supply, and also the consumer expenditure between the year 2019 and 2030.
Tourist arrivals, generally speaking, for Africa are up. In fact, they are certainly for 2017, we have the consolidated figures for 2017. They are largely well above the global average. And in fact, for the African continent as a whole, we are running about second in terms of global percentage arrival. So very healthy. Although we are still small in terms of global arrivals, the growth rate across the African continent has been impressive. And again, it's a function of better economic performance and an improved security conditions, partially for East Africa, but also for North Africa, where there's been a tremendous spurt of growth in the hotel industry, particularly in Egypt and in Morocco. And in terms of the hotel pipelines of rooms coming on stream, or keys coming on stream, as they say, once again, North Africa leads the way with Egypt and Morocco. Addis Ababa, again, with a huge increase in the amount of hotel rooms coming on stream. Here in Nairobi as well, big increases coming forward. There are challenges with that. You can have an oversupply of rooms, clearly. And that oversupply may last for a certain period until such a time as the economy again grows to absorb some of those new keys coming on the market. So I think the hotel operators themselves understand that the growth rates are going to largely come from developing markets into the future. There's a huge growth rate in hotel rooms in China. Africa remains underserved in terms of the availability of hotels across this continent, and with the increased arrivals and better than average economic growth rates, it makes sense that the Marriotts and Hiltons are fighting, in a sense, over properties across the continent. And that's why we see this amazing announcement of new rollout of properties just in the course of the last few days as a result of this conference.
Now, it has been a really interesting conversation with you, but before we wind up, I would like to ask, what does Africa need to do in order to position itself for economic takeoff, because it has the potential and there's the goodwill? What does it need to do?
It's a difficult question. There are a lot of strands to it. I think what's important for most of Africa is that economies need to diversify. Many economies have been far too reliant upon one or two key industries, particularly those economies that have a commodity or what I call extractive base. So economies like Nigeria, Angola, even South Africa need to diversify out to services, which they are starting to do, and also into what I would call high-tech niche markets, which is a particular niche, alongside a more low-level manufacturing base that can absorb, in a sense, some of the jobs that will leave China as wages go up in China, seeking a more low-wage worker, of which Africa certainly does have and have in abundance. So I think Africa needs a mixed picture of all of these different aspects to enhance her productivity and to provide jobs for those millions of young people coming on stream. So there's no one silver bullet, in a sense, for the continent. But I do caution, though, and I think there's something that, when we don't talk, perhaps we do talk about it enough, we are entering an era of artificial intelligence. And I think for many industries across the world, not just for us here in Africa, there is a growing concern of how robotics are going to interact with human beings, particularly when it comes to lower-end manufacturing, which is a sector that Africa should be targeting. So understanding how machines work, how machines can augment the human being into the future is going to be vital for educational systems, not just in America, not just in China, but for us here on the continent as well. Still, there's a movement across the continent away from really low-level agriculture-based jobs to more service industry jobs. We see it in Kenya, we see it in Ethiopia, and I think that's the way to go. An interesting mix of all of these different facets which can begin to absorb the millions of young people who will desperately need relatively decent work going forward. But that's another discussion for a number of hours. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now let's take a look at how the markets performed today, and here is a summary. That is a run-through of how the markets performed, but for more in-depth analysis of the same, tune in tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. for my next big bet with Rachel Deritu and Karanja Daniel. Well, here is the day's weather report. Well, we hope you enjoyed the interview with Daniel Silk. That marks the end of this business bulletin tonight. On behalf of everyone that made it a success, thank you very much for watching. You can catch a rerun of the same at 10 p.m. tonight. From us, it's good night, God bless, and make the most of your October.